Welcome with Justice with Janell. So, my name is Janell Foster. I am an attorney with the Law Office of Janell Foster, and thank you for joining my podcast today. Today is going to be a very good show. This podcast is to link the urban community with the legal community, just so that the urban community can have answers to relevant legal topics and just be able to hear from different legal people in the community that can help with many different things. So today we are talking to two attorneys who are going to talk about navigating PFAs. So today we have Jennifer DePillo and we also have Jackie Jones. So I'm going to let these awesome ladies introduce themselves so they can tell you a little bit about who they are, what they do, and why they're going to know so much about PFAs. We're going to go ahead and get started with Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Janelle. So, as Janelle said, my name is Jennifer DePillo. I am the director of the Crime Victims Law Project. I work within Delaware County Victim Assistance Center. Some people may remember us as our former name, which was Delaware County Women Against Rape. I've been here off and on since the early 2000s, like 2001. I have two attorneys that work with me now, and we represent all victims of crime in various areas, including PFAs. I think that's our biggest area of representation, as well as other family law issues and Title IX, some landlord-tenant contract issues, etc.
Thank you so much. And Jackie?
Hello, I'm Jackie Jones, Jones & Associates Law PC, your family fixer. And I'm really excited to be here. Like Jennifer, I have been in the last 20 plus years in Delaware County. I am a little different in that I don't always just work with crime victims or people who are alleged to be that. I also do defense work. So there are days when I'm in PFA court, which you'll hear about, where I am representing the plaintiff, the person who's claiming they've been abused, like today when Jennifer and I saw each other. And there are days where I'm representing the person who's been accused of abuse. So between the two of us, we see all sides of how this works. And I don't say both sides, I say all sides, because it can be plaintiff and defendant in PFA court, but it could also be victim and criminal defendant in criminal court. And so they often circulate around each other. So I'm really excited about today because I think you're going to get an idea of how this process works, how it impacts the rest of your life, whether that is through the criminal court or sometimes even through your family court and your custody orders and divorces. So exciting, exciting stuff.
Well, I know both of these ladies personally, and they're both awesome attorneys, awesome women. So I think this is going to be a really good show today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first question I want to ask both of you is exactly what is a protection of abuse? What is it? So we'll go ahead and start with Jennifer. What is a protection from abuse?
So we like to use acronyms a lot. Protection from abuse protection from abuse is what PFA stands for. In Delaware County and in Pennsylvania, we actually have two other, we often refer to them as PFAs, but there are two other subsets of that protection from abuse law. So the traditional PFA, which is what we mostly talk about, is a family or household member that is filing against another. So in a typical scenario, you see like spouses or boyfriend, girlfriend, exes, parents, grandparents, that kind of scenario. We also have the Sexual Violence Protection Act, which we shorten with SVPO. That protects people that are a victim of some kind of sexual violence. In that scenario, the parties are not related at all. So under the initial PFA, they have to be related somehow or have some kind of, by marriage or by blood, some kind of relationship. The SVP is no relationship, and there's some kind of sexual violence that occurs. There's also a third subset, which is protection from intimidation. That is a very unique subset. That is where the victim of the abuse has to be a minor, so under the age of 18, and the perpetrator has to be an adult. It's typically a harassment type situation. And if we do utilize that PFI, an adult has to file on behalf of the child. The child can't file on their own. Same would go for any of the others. If it is a child victim, an adult would have to file that in court for them.
Thank you. So, Jackie, tell us who cannot get a PFA. So, what type of cases where you see that someone wants a PFA, but they actually can't get one?
Well, I think Jennifer actually just touched on it when she said who can get it, because with the exception of those two special types, for a standard PFA, there has to be some sort of relationship. So
Right.
the usual people who can't get it, or I'll give you a good example. We both, I'm dating someone and he has an ex or a girlfriend or something like that. And the two of us get into an altercation and one of us is yelling, I'm going to get a PFA against you. No, that's a regular old assault. Like, you guys have a criminal action, that's an assault. You don't have any actual family relationship or ties with each other. So we have this habit of using TV terms like restraining order, where people say, oh, I'm going to get a restraining order against you. Or in Pennsylvania, because you heard the term PFA, you think PFA. Well, literally, those are specifically a regular standard PFA that you will see all the time is going to be people who are related within certain degrees. And so while it doesn't have to be a spouse, it doesn't have to be boyfriend, girlfriend, but it tends to be former or current sexual partners, family members, or something like that. So just remember that if you are dealing with someone who is a random person who is harassing or assaulting you, that may be a police action, but it may not, and most likely it's not a PFA action. And that's where you have to really be careful. And also, when you're looking at something like what Jennifer said, take a look at something like, is there a sexual violence issue, which means we can get this other type of order, or is there a child being intimidated by an adult, which is something different. But generally speaking, you're not going to qualify for those special ones. You won't qualify for a PFA just because someone is harassing you.
And here's one that I find that we are clearly missing in Pennsylvania. We see it a lot in California when you have random stalker, right? Like, I have those clients come into my office. I'm being stalked by some dude I used to work with. Like, I don't know him. We never had a relationship. You can't get a protection order. It's a criminal act, maybe, like Jackie said, and you have to go to the police, but there is no civil remedy for that here in Pennsylvania.
Right. So if somebody wanted to file for a PFA, where would they go?
Depends on the timing. So when the Delaware County Courthouse and Media is open between the hours of 8:30 and 4:30, I believe, you go there. There's a special area for protection order filing, and they will assist, although they will not give you legal advice. They will assist you with giving you paperwork so that you can do the filing. Once you do the filing, you will go see a judge. They do that twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. The judge decides whether or not they're going to grant it. If they do grant it, then you have to take that paperwork to your police station as well as the defendant's police station for it to be served if it's in the county. If it's out of county, it has to go to our sheriff's department in Delaware County, which is also in the courthouse. If it happens to be after business hours, we call those emergency protection orders, and that you would have to go to your district court. Typically, you would call your local police and say you would like to file, and they would let you know which district court you would attend in the evening, because they're not all open. So they would direct you to go there. That protection order, if it is granted, stays in effect until the Delaware County Courthouse and Media opens the next business day, and you would need to do that temporary process that I described previous.
Okay. And so, Jackie, how much does it cost, and does the person need an attorney?
So you're not going to be charged to file a protection from abuse order. File protection from abuse, that's important. It's really important that you know you can seek the court's protection without money, and you don't need an attorney. However, maybe you want one, or maybe you need one because you have a special circumstance. So if you are filing a general, my husband and I got into a physical fight last night, he abused me, he tried to kick me out of the house, he did that, you can probably go in there, explain that to the judge, and get your temporary PFA. However, if you have a more difficult situation, or quite frankly, if you're intimidated and you are having trouble speaking with the court system and you want protection, you absolutely can have an attorney. But what I want to encourage everyone to know is please don't ever fail to go and get protection when you need it because of money or because of lack of an attorney. You can have it granted if you have if you have no cash, you have nothing. You walk in there, they will help you. You'll fill out the paperwork. A judge can give you an immediate order right away to protect you immediately. So please don't let money or attorney stop you from seeking protection.
The other important thing to know too, when you file that temporary order in media, is that the turnaround time is really quick for when you're going to have to come back. So a lot of people don't realize that. They go to the court, they do the filing, and then they don't realize they're going to have to be back in 7 to 10 days to see a judge again with the opposing party there. A lot of people don't realize that too. They go in and think, well, I'm just going to get this and then I'm done and I don't have to see this person ever again. That's not how it works. So that's why sometimes it's great to meet with an attorney to find out all these details, to know what you're getting yourself into before you file, as long as you're not in an emergent situation and need it right away, because that is really important to make sure you get that protection if you need it.
Okay. So, Jackie, I'm going to ask you this question. What should you do if you are wrongly accused and someone is taken out, they went through the process because, right, that's done ex parte. And what that means is that both parties aren't there at the initial hearing. So I'm going to use this scenario like there's a spouse situation. The spouse goes, she gets this PFA based on lies and all kind of things. And then the husband receives the PFA and none of it's true. And they have this hearing coming up. So what should he do?
So Janell and I were in the same office for a while. So I'm laughing because we heard a lot of running across the street because we were right across the street from the courthouse. These are all lies and I've been accused of and I've been falsely accused. In those cases, yes, get an attorney. You really need an attorney. Yes. And it's interesting because obviously there are some things that are not truthful. Sometimes there are lies and conjectures. And there are also some unscrupulous attorneys. We used to have this thing where we call PFAs the Delaware County divorce. We used to say, and Jennifer, you remember this, where we'd say there are certain family law attorneys who would take advantage of the PFA statutes, and instead of protecting their clients, they'd take them over there and go, file this PFA, get the house, get the kids, and then you're in a better position when we file for divorce. Obviously, that's not great, and our judges have really been hip to that and are really trying to make sure they separate out custody issues, divorce issues from PFAs. But you want to get an attorney because having the protection from abuse order against you, it could impact your job, especially if had a number of men in the military, police officers, people like MP who had to carry weapons. It can impact your ability to carry weapons. I had someone who was private security, so he needed to carry a weapon as part of his job, or someone who was in the military, he needed a weapon as part of his job. If you have even a temporary protection from abuse order against you, you may not be able to have a gun, for instance. The police may come and take your weapons from you. There are certain neighborhoods where people don't feel safe without their firearm. So if you are in a position where you've been accused of a PFA, whether it's true or not true, you do want to seek counsel. If you do have evidence to show that it's not true, you especially want to seek counsel. Why do I say that? Because our judges, while they may be understanding that you're pro se, are not going to violate all the rules of court to let you put on any evidence you want. There's nothing worse than showing up in court, and I've seen it over the course of years, an older gentleman who showed up with a 7-page handwritten letter that he wanted to read, and one of the judges let him do it. The new ones would not. There were people who have things on their phone. I want to show you my phone. Some judges don't want to look at your phone. I have all the text messages. Some judges want those printed out. And so if you are fighting for your life, so to speak, meaning you don't want to have a protection from abuse on your record, have it impact you, what you do want to do is seek an attorney, and you want to present all your evidence ahead of time. Even though we will have a court date 7 to 10 days, if you haven't been served properly or if you need time to prepare, you will be given a continuance for that purpose.
And I was just going to add that, Jackie, that even though we say it happens quickly, and it does, we're in court within 7 to 10 business days, but the problem is we see more often than not that it's continued again and again, depending on the scenario that if there's criminal case underlying, if there's someone that's trying to get an attorney and needs more time. So especially in those situations where somebody needs to carry a gun for work, it's not going to be resolved necessarily in 7 to 10 days. So it's important to get an attorney that understands what's happening and help you out.
And Jennifer and I were in court today for PFAs. And one of the things we did see was someone who had a pending criminal matter related to their PFA. And the case was continued because defendants have certain rights in criminal court to not incriminate themselves, not to speak. So as a criminal defense attorney, I want to prevent my client from moving forward with a PFA case that could cause us problems in the criminal case, since I have greater constitutional protections in criminal cases.
And as we've all seen, those cases can go on and on. I know I've had some in my cabinet behind me that have gone on for 2 or 3 years that I've had a protection order in place. So in those types of scenarios where there's a criminal case pending, it is really important to have somebody representing your interests.
So y'all have talked a lot about guns, so I'm glad that we brought that up. So Jennifer, can you tell us what happens with the PFA if the person has a gun? What can be done, and what protection does the PFA give you against a person with a gun?
Yeah, great question. So one of the big things that can happen when you're checking off all the boxes on your very long paperwork that you're filling out, one of the things that you can ask is for the guns to be taken. And as of right now, there's a Supreme Court case sort of pending where things are going to go. But as of right now, the guns can be relinquished to the sheriff, and I think it's to a repositor, so it has to be a specific place. It can't just be I'm giving it to my brother or my friend, and then getting it back. I'm going to let Jackie talk about that because it's much harder to get it back. My understanding.
I had a case where a client wanted to get the gun back, and when I tell you, it took months to get his gun back.
Yes.
Months. And it's a whole convoluted.
There's motions usually that have to happen. It's a lot. I'll let Jackie talk about that. But the one thing that I've seen happen specifically is a client will say to me, I know he has a gun. I don't know where it is. I know where he used to keep it, but I don't know where it is now. And if you can't give the judge a specific location, we can argue it in court, but there's no right for the police to go in there. They don't have a search warrant. They can't go in and just search the house and look for it. They have to have a specific idea of where it is, like it's in the trunk of his car or it's in a lockbox in our bedroom. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, then the guns don't get turned over, and that can be a problem too.
And that's definitely something we all worry of. We've either been victims of crimes or have represented people who are victims, and the idea that there is a high-risk situation and a gun that cannot be secured is a really big deal for all of us. We've all seen this turn into tragedy. And, there's also this issue where the legislator was looking at extreme risk protection orders, which have been, depending on what side of the political fence you're on, there have been a lot of issues on whether or not they should be allowed or shouldn't be allowed. And, how soon or how long, or if you should be able to take someone's gun during a protection from abuse action. So it's still very much in the air in Pennsylvania how it's going to turn out. We're still fighting this on a day-by-day basis.
Agreed. And how about getting them back? What do you do to get them back?
Janell can tell you how long did it take.
Yeah, I did. I had a case that went on for months. What happened was the case was here in Delaware County. The person lived in a different county, turned the gun in a different county. And when I tell you it was a fiasco to get the gun back, it took months to get it back, motion in the court. And, the sheriff's office and police departments don't always understand that the person is to get the gun back. They don't want to give the gun back. So it is difficult. It can be done. I mean, of course, I was very persistent and I got the gun back from my client, but I will say it wasn't without a cost because he had to pay me to do all the paperwork to consistently speak with the police department to get him the gun back. So it's definitely it's not easy to get the gun back, but can be done.
And that's one of those cases where we say, do you need an attorney? And here's the thing that's fair, unfair, right? Depending on whether you feel like you've been treated fairly or not. As a defendant, you're going to possibly incur costs that the person who's asking for protection doesn't. You go in asking for protection, you can get protection. You don't have to pay for your attorney, for instance. You don't have to pay for the paperwork. But if you want someone to defend you, with the exception of the public defender's office, who only defend in certain cases, and usually in things like when there's a contempt or those sort of things, you are paying money to defend these protection from abuse actions. So there is definitely skin in the game for anyone who's been accused, because if they want to go in with an attorney, they're going to need to come up with some cash.
Right.
And then if they wanted their gun returned, they may have to come up with some more cash. So a lot of expenses can happen. Sometimes
and with the guns, I've even seen, a defense attorney go in and argue that the defendant wanted like one gun back.
Right.
Maybe they had 10 guns and they took all of them, but they're an avid hunter and hunting season's coming. I had that case a number of years ago, and the judge at the time was like, nope, sorry, you're going to have to wait until we have our hearing and see what happens. But
and that's also our county, because there may be counties where you taking someone's hunting gun is like, absolutely not. We don't
exactly.
do that.
Yeah. You want to go a little west, a little more west, you're going to have bigger issues with hunting.
Right.
Yeah.
So now this is one of the things that I think I've seen that's a little harder. What is your experience with men filing for PFAs against women? And do you feel like there's still this, like it looks, men want to be macho, right? They want to be known as men. And so if you're going down there saying, hey, I'm being abused by my women, do you find that that's harder for men? And how do they kind of fare in court?
Well, Jackie had one today.
I did. I had a man today. He filed. I think in part because she was trying to take their child to and try to do some things. So, it's amazing how a man doesn't mind when it comes to protecting his baby. He doesn't mind saying, I need help. I've a couple of thoughts on this. I've represented men in the past, some who would file a PFA and then they come to me and say, I need an attorney. Okay, I go to court. And when we get to questioning, well, are you afraid of her? I'm not afraid of her. She can't beat me, Well, then there's no need for a protection or abuse. You're not afraid of any actual abuse. You don't have a fear. So I've had that. But I've also had men who I had to counsel and say, and this is not a secret. My brother was murdered by the mother of his children. I had men I had to counsel and say, she is dangerous. I'm telling you, as someone who's experienced this, that the next time could be your life. You have reason to be scared. Let's go through this. Because some men have difficulty thinking, because physically they may be stronger than her. Well, you know what? You're not strong. When the knife hits you in the wrong spot, like it did my brother, or when she shoots you, like it's happened to other people, there is no stronger than. Or there is when you're trying not to harm her and she doesn't. I had a woman who threw a TV on a guy because he's so busy trying to just contain her and not fight, and she didn't care. She was going with all her strength. So as I tell men, if you're doing it to play games, like I just want to get the PFA, no, you don't deserve it. You're not in fear or whatever. But if you are in a situation where you need that protection from abuse, I counsel men to really take it seriously and be willing to tell the court, I have a reason to be afraid of her. She's dangerous. She's unpredictable. Mm-hmm. She has pulled weapons on me. I think there are some men who are starting to get that now, because a few years ago, I could not get a man to admit that he was actually afraid, even if he filed a PFA.
Yeah, I think the numbers are still
points. Yeah, you made valid points, because it's not about who's stronger, right? It's like, obviously men are just naturally stronger than women, but if they have a weapon, who's strongest doesn't even matter. But
no.
Sometimes just the perception of a man just saying, I have to file for a PFA, it could just be very difficult. So I'm glad that you're definitely counseling men to see it in a total different light. Go ahead, Jennifer. You wanted to say something?
I feel like the statistics are still, it's many more women are filing, and it's a lot more domestic violence related issues. But I think we've seen the numbers moving a bit, and we have more men that are coming forward and saying that. I've represented men over the years, and it is hard for them to sort of admit. So I feel like, and even for crime victims, if, for instance, men are victims of crime as well, but they don't always come forward to get assistance with that because of societal norms, right? So we do see it, but I don't think it's the correct numbers that it should be. Yeah. And then you get the assumptions from some of the judges too, like Jackie and I said earlier. Sometimes the judges just assume that it's the woman is the plaintiff when they're not. Right.
How long can you get a PFA for?
So when I first started and when Jackie first started, it was 18 months was the maximum you can get in PA. They changed that at some point. I don't remember what year. And now it's 3 years is the maximum. If you have a hearing, the judge has the ability to go within that. So I've seen a lot lately where they're not doing the maximum 3 years. They're doing maybe a year. They're doing 6 months. They're trying to look at the scenario and see what might work once they've heard all the evidence. But 3 years for the final. But with that being said, we discussed how sometimes you continue cases for an extremely long time due to underlying criminal cases. So that 3 years is on top of what you already had as a temporary continued order. So I've had some cases where it was continued for, say, 2-3 years. Someone had that protection. We went in. I had the one I had today. So she had her PFA for, I want to say 2.5-3 years while we were waiting for the criminal case to come to fruition. And then because the defendant pled guilty, he decided to agree to a final 3-year order. So in the end, she's going to have almost 6 years of protection.
And let's also keep in mind what that means, because there are times where a crime victim is involved and it's settled. And, we may not feel safe after the 3 years, but there may not always be a reason. Like I've had people come in and they're like, well, the 3 years is up. I need a new PFA. And, if I'm representing the defendant, I may say, wait a second, my client hasn't had any contact with you in well over the 3 years. My client has moved on with their life. We shouldn't even have to be here. Or, and so sometimes explaining even to a victim and saying, listen, I have no basis to ask for a new PFA. 4 years ago, this person did X to you and you had a number of continuances and you were granted a 3-year final PFA, and you haven't so much as seen them at the supermarket. I actually had one where they did see them at Costco and they turned right around and walked away. And she was like asking for this extension. And I was like, he showed up at the regular Costco and left when he saw you. And you don't even, and this happened at this point 4.5 years ago. So it can be a sense of relief as a victim, but it also can be a sense of oppression if you were the defendant and you feel like it's never going to end.
Right. And for those extensions, we normally will counsel a victim and say, okay, what's going on that is, that you're bringing this up? Is it just because now it's going to end? Because if that's the case, that's not enough. We want to see that there's been some kind of contact. There's some reason for you to be afraid. Like maybe he's just getting out of prison. And if that's the case, I would say, okay, we can try and see, what the judge says, because depending on how egregious the act was and how long the prison term was, all of that stuff comes into play. So the extensions are possible. There's also another thing which has come up. I mean, Jackie and I have each been practicing over 20 years, but I know for me, it was a couple of years ago, I was like, what is this thing? You can actually modify. Anybody can go in and ask to modify an existing final order. And I had one a few years back where another attorney came in and filed for a modification saying they wanted the children removed from the PFA. And we had to argue that. And it was a very interesting scenario because I was like, wait a second, how can you go and get a second bite at this apple? But I looked it up and the statute says you're allowed to do that. So it doesn't come up frequently, but it happens.
Our judges typically tell you go to custody court. So custody court is the court of the same jurisdiction, same level. Court of Common Pleas, they have the ability to enter a new order that relates specifically to the children. So if you have children involved, what may happen is they may enter a temporary order, but they don't want to be in the practice of making decision about parents ultimately connecting with their kids on a single incident PFA or something like that. So we will often find that we may go to court on a PFA, and by the time we come back, or maybe it's been a cooling off period, there has been a custody order, and that custody order is prescribing how those two interact as it relates to the children.
And the important thing to note is if it's not listed in the PFA, say the PFA came first, right? And it's not listed in the PFA, that a hearing officer can modify the custody when they are in custody court, then you have to go back to PFA court and have the kids removed. So if you already know there's going to be a custody issue, you want to make sure you have certain language in the PFA so that you can get into custody court and not have to go back another
And I
step
was
in the
there
PFA.
2 weeks ago, and this was one of the issues. There was a PFA in place, and they had one issue because the judge said, well, as long as the hearing officer said, well, as long as I'm in PFA court, I can't do anything. They went back to PFA court, got information that would allow the hearing officer to make a decision on custody. And then she made a decision on custody. She's like, but I also know there's a PFA issue, so I'm going to be very careful about how I prescribe contact between the two of you as parties. Because, and it like you said, if you don't put in that original PFA, they had to run back. There were multiple courts, multiple times to deal with the custody. It wasn't my case, though.
Yeah, and it costs money. If you have an attorney, that's going to cost money every time they have to appear back in court, right, and prepare for each thing because they're different.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you are talking about custody, because that's what I wanted to ask next, which is how does divorce and custody, and specifically, you have two people living in a house, a set of kids, and now here's this PFA. So, let's talk about how did these PFA orders include custody, different ramifications. I know we've touched on it a little bit, but then also divorce, leaving the house. How does that all work with PFAs?
So let Jen talk about the PFA side of it, and then I'll talk about the custody divorce side of it. Even though they're in the same courts, it's different.
Yeah. So on the PFA paperwork, when you're filling it out, there is a section asking for the alleged perpetrator, to be evicted from the home. And that works in a scenario where you're sharing the home together. So like specifically what you talked about, Janell, you have a husband and wife with kids. The wife goes in, says, he beat me and I, need this protection. I would like him, removed from the household. And then there's also a section where you can check off about custody. So they do ask if you already have a custody order in effect. And if you do, what does that say? If you don't, would you like some custody provisions put in here? And that's an important piece of having an attorney involved, because I think most pro se parties, while they can sort of navigate the system and it is pretty friendly for pro se parties, that's a specific thing that you really would need a little assistance on. Like, how do I word that? What do I do? Most people just check off full custody, right? They think I have full custody, dad's not going to get anything in that specific scenario. And then you get to court and then you start litigating some of that. And the judges in PFA court don't want to be litigating custody. They don't want to be looking at divorce issues. And so they tell you, you got to go to custody court. You have to go to divorce court. Have you filed for custody? Have you filed for divorce? And it's really important because we have a lot of cases that come through. We have protection cases only on Thursdays. Typically, like today, we had around 100. That's a lot of people moving through, and the judges don't have the time to spend on all the little minutia underneath. So they're trying to get to the heart of the matter. Are you abused? Do you need protection? So for everything else, that would be another court, and I'll let Jackie go into the custody divorce piece.
So I hinted earlier that we used to not very jokingly call it Delaware County divorce. And what I meant by that was because you could get someone evicted and excluded from the house and get certain custody provisions, there are unscrupulous people who would file for PFAs or, do everything they can to try to push you into doing something so they can say, oh, I'm afraid, so that they can jumpstart the divorce. The issue is that, as Jennifer said, our judges don't want to hear all of your divorce and custody issues. So what tends to happen is someone will come to us outside of PFA court and say, I went to court in this PFA. I agreed. I'll stay away from her. She'll stay away from me. But they said I can't see my kids. And, what does that mean? They said go to custody court. So you typically then have to file a new custody petition, which is going to cost you $300. You got to file that, or file a divorce with custody, which is again going to cost you $300 and something, $325. But what ends up happening is you have to file it, and then the first thing you do is go into front of a hearing officer. Again, as Jennifer mentioned, does the PFA have provisions about whether or not there's custody, and does it give the hearing officer permission? Remember I said equal courts can make decisions. Well, a hearing officer is not an equal court. Court of Common Pleas judges are equal courts. So first we have to go through that hearing officer process. And most people want to do that because it takes so long to get a full custody trial in front of them.
And I was just going to say, Jackie, how long does it take to even get to a hearing officer now? We're like 60 to 90 days out, right?
No, you're supposed to be done within 45 days.
And in reality,
I'll tell you what happened. In reality, what happens is you call and say, hey, I don't have my date. when's it coming? And then all of a sudden, magically, it appears in my office, scheduled within 2 or 3 days of me doing that. I'm sorry, not sorry. They're overwhelmed. But so what ends up happening is, if you are an unscrupulous person and the judge is not very aware and they don't pay enough attention, you could set it up so that someone is not seeing their child and is out of their home for a while. And in fact, when the marital residence may be your premarital residence, there are times where you will get kicked out of the house that you own and the other person doesn't, while this is going on. And I've had people
and I was going to even say, I have a case right now where my client was not married to the opposing party.
Right.
She got him evicted and excluded from his house. He had no duty to support, which is the reason why you can evict somebody. So if they had a child together, let's say, she would still have that right to evict him and exclude him. They didn't. And he was out of the house the entire time the criminal case was going on, and she was living there. Yeah. And it was just an interesting scenario. And that's because his attorney didn't object to that in the beginning and let it happen. And so she got to live in the house. You won't
object, but the judge feels really bad, and they don't always go through all the steps, right? And I mean, I've had it, and I was like, and I remember one time when I came in, and it was a temporary order. He comes and gets me like this, and I get it, and I'm like, she's not his wife.
Right.
It's his house. He was taking care of her kid and his kid. Her kid actually didn't want to leave with her, wanted to stay with him. Excuse me, it was a mess. But the point was, he's paying mortgage. She's never getting any share of this house ever. She's not his spouse. Right. Why would he have to be out of his house? And then she trashed it. It was one of those people who are misusing the PFA, though, because he broke up with her, asked her to leave. She made false allegations. There was a lot of evidence they were false because he was so distrustful of her. Even he had to get a dash camera. So she was making allegations about, he did this or he did that, and he was chasing me in the car and all these things. So it was verifiably not true. But the first thing was an exclusion from the house before I had gotten involved in the case.
Right. Well, I think that's the sad part about PFAs. It's like, sometimes people use it as a weapon, and it's very sad, especially for the people that really, really, really need a PFA. And then it makes the day longer because here we have 100, like you said, it's 100 cases. And how many of them are false, sitting in the 100? You probably have several every week.
Unfortunately, the judges don't have the time to vet them all, right? They're just trying to get through. And that's the problem. And the other issue is justice is slow. Right. Everywhere. Yes. And this is the quickest place you're going to get in and get some resolution of something. And so people start to know that and then start to use it because we live in a society where everybody wants everything right now. Amazon, if it comes in 3 days, people are like, what? We're used to that now. Growing up, we were used to waiting for things. Like nowadays, that's not a thing. So I think it's even being used more in that scenario because it's fast.
Don't forget the right to the hearing, because even when it's denied, we have a right to a hearing. So we also want a day where we're there with all the people who have been granted temporary orders. There are people who've been denied their temporary orders who are there for a hearing on whether or not it should happen.
Right. Yeah, it's the system, the whole system of PFAs. It's a very long day. When the court will say be there at 8:30, but we all know when it's PFA day, which is Thursdays, be prepared because you're about to sit and wait. It's a lot of hurry up and wait.
Remember that judge who used to get us out by 11:30?
Yes.
I miss her. I think we're Wednesdays back then. It's like, yeah, we'd be out. It's 11:30. We're out. Everyone's
well, I actually had her one day when it went until noon, and I had to get my kids who are now in college that were in preschool. And I said, Your Honor, I have to go pick my kids up from preschool. And she was like, Mr. Pillow, we have to get you out of here. Okay, go. And
she had to go pick her up. She liked to be home for her child when he got home too.
Yeah, so she had
it was great. Yeah. We're done.
Yeah, it's hard though. I mean, you have that many cases and you have, the way we do it back then was we had one judge every week. We had the same judge. So she got used to seeing the same people over and over too. So she was able to sniff out the stuff that wasn't valid because she's seeing the same
Right.
cases over and over. Where now we have the cycle around. So we have 5 judges, and so they're only sitting once a month, less actually. So it's, once every 5 weeks they're sitting. So they're not all seeing the same stuff.
Yeah. So now let's say you have the PFA, you have the temporary order, you got the final order, and the person is still continuing to contact you. Then what?
I have that right now. Had a final order for a client, and defendant was not represented, which he very well should have been, but was not. He kept driving down her street for no apparent reason. So she filed for a modification for the PFA to specifically exclude him from the street, because she went to the police and they said, well, it doesn't really say he can't go down your street.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So then we changed it. He agreed for it to say that. I sat down with him, even though he didn't have an attorney. And I said, look, I'm not your attorney. I'm going to go through this with you. Just stay off her street, because if you go down her street, you're going to have a problem. So we phrased it so that it said repeatedly going down the street could rise to the level of an indirect criminal contempt, which is where I'm getting, right? So he then, I don't know, a year or so goes by, he starts doing it again. So now she calls me and says, I don't know why. My neighbors are calling me saying he's driving down the street. I'm seeing him drive down the street. He has a very distinctive vehicle, so it's very easy to identify his car. So I said, well, go to the police. And she has a ring cam. So she took the ring cam with her, the footage, to the police. She showed them 6 different instances of him coming by in a short window of time. And they said, great, we're going to charge him. So they charged him with indirect criminal contempt, but they also ended up charging him with different crimes, harassment and stalking. So it's in the process right now. So I'm curious to see how that all plays out. But he finally got an attorney. So hopefully this is going to be worked out, and he's going to get advice to stay away. He's the stalker situation, but they actually had a relationship a number of years ago for a hot minute. I mean, they weren't together very long. It was a very short relationship. So none of this really makes a lot of sense.
And I'm involved in indirect criminal contempt tomorrow. Yeah, and it's a defendant, and she and her ex have been going through a lot of custody things. I think he's using the PFA statute incorrectly and in order to punish her. But again, she went in without an attorney for that one. And the judge was like, let's do a 90-day cooling off period, and I could dismiss it afterwards. Well, what happened? He's now filing indirect criminal contempt because he doesn't want it dismissed. The one that is most ridiculous, and then remember, these go to your local police. So this is part of the problem. The issue was that the child had run away from home, teenage girl. She wasn't answering. I know she was in contact with her mother, and she's not supposed to be in contact with her mother. And she was at such and such address. Well, such and such address is her friend's house. They literally filed an indirect criminal contempt against my client as if she's violating an order by the child running away and going to her friend's house. My client now has to pay me to go in and say, what part of this is not my client's address? It's not,
right.
And I'm like, well, how do you know all this? She's like, because my daughter is in contact with my dad. Like, she reached out to my dad and was like, hey, and Grandpa, this is what's going on. And by the way, Dad is threatening the child, saying, I'll take your mother to jail if you keep doing X, or if you do Y, or if you go here or you go there. And so my client is constantly on the defensive for what's a false indirect criminal contempt. And I know we talked about legitimate cases where you have to go in and you show your evidence. But depending on your police department, you can have ones who say, even with your evidence, I don't care, this isn't anything. Or you can have some that say, hey, as long as you say they violated, we're just going to put it through. So there's a range of how it happens. And that's why we go to court, and we have to go to court to fight these things, because we don't know whether the police department got it right or not.
Right. I had a case where a client.
I'm sorry.
My client had a PFA. That's okay. My client had a PFA against her husband, and he was friends with the neighbor across the street. So he would go and get permission from the neighbor to come over and stand in the front yard, like with his hands, and just stare at her front. And his excuse was, I'm at the neighbor's house. I'm not at your house. I'm not bothering you. I'm visiting a neighbor. And if I'm standing out in the front yard, how is that bothering you? And it was just trying to get around the system,
Yeah.
Because it was like, well, that's private property and I can still visit the neighbor. So, and I'm going to stand in his front yard, basically to try to intimidate you.
Right. And there's some police departments that would say, yes, that's an intimidation tactic. And we're going to file the ICC and maybe we're going to file some kind of intimidation thing. Yep. But then you have other police departments that are like, it's not enough. He's allowed to be on that street. It's private property. He hasn't really done anything to physically harm you, and that's the, I do a lot of police trainings and I feel like it's a shame that there's such inconsistency between departments, and I'm not really sure how you fix that because they're all sort of their own little universe. But I wish it was a little more universal in how they dealt with stuff.
And it's also hard because I hate to kind of gatekeep people, and I hate to be in a situation where we are sort of shaming people for their emotions. But what happens is that this is very emotional. And if you're a person who is overwhelmed by it, you may be crying, you may be difficult to understand, you may be really trying to explain to them that I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but he's just standing outside of my house. But you can't explain that he told you he'd never leave you alone. You can't ever go anywhere without him watching you. And you don't know if you have a friend over, you're afraid he's going to, you can't explain all that. And there is this process wherein sometimes people in authority don't really understand that the person is very upset because it's an accumulation of a lot of things. And that is part of that difficulty. Is really, this is why you may want an attorney or someone who can advocate for you, even if it's just a friend or family member who stays close to you and discusses these things with you, because there are people who really, truly are overwhelmed by the emotion of it all, and the people in authority don't see that. They see it as an inconvenience instead, or they see it as some sort of.
Well, they look at it as an objective standard. Like it doesn't affect me, so I don't know why it affects you. And when I do police trainings, I try to explain to them it's subjective. So to some casual onlooker, it might not look like a big deal, but and I always give this silly scenario. If my client says to me, he used to leave me roses before he would come home and beat me. And she sees roses on her car, she's going to freak out, right? And you might not be able to explain that in that moment of trauma that you're happening, and the police go, he left roses. That's not anything negative, and it's like, no, well, it is to her because she knows what the next thing is.
Right. It's like the tone policing. Like they want you to do it in their way, their tone, their style. And if the abusers did everything to classic abuse, you wouldn't need the protections because everyone would be like, oh, that's an abuser. That's what abusers do.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, we're going to have now our question from the public. So we're going to have Diamond come on with the questions.
Hey,
so this is Diamond. She's legal assistant at my office. So she's going to give you the question from the public today.
Okay, question from the public. It says, what factors do judges consider when granting or denying a PFA order?
I would say that one of the biggest things that they look at is violence or threat of violence. So I think a lot of judges want to see some kind of physical violence, which is why if you don't have that, you might want to get an attorney, because there are other things, just like we talked about the subjective stuff, right? That judges need to be explained to them in a different way. That I feel like when you're a victim of violence or a crime, everybody deals with victimization in their own sort of way. And so it's difficult for you to explain to a judge why you've reacted in a certain way. Like, for example, I deal with a lot of sexual assault victims, and they often don't do what typically the police or the public thinks that they should do after it happens. And you have defense attorneys that'll bring in text messages where they say, I just had sex with someone, when they were actually just raped, but hadn't really come to that conclusion in their brain yet because they're in a trauma state. So it's having someone that understands being trauma informed and being able to help you. But I would say for me, I think what I see the judges focus on a lot is the threat of physical violence or physical violence, and they'll ask specific questions geared in that way.
And don't forget the harassment, because sometimes the harassment is just so, it's so overarching that it's hard for even a judge to go, nope, this is, because I may not be threatening violence, but if I am constantly calling your phone, I'm sending you 50, 100 text messages in 2 minutes. I've seen things like that where they were just calling over and over and over again, texting repeatedly, hours on end, interrupting my job and my ability to do anything. Some of those instances, I think the judge, even without violence, can say, yeah, this, you can't work if someone is texting you all day long and calling you all day long.
Right.
And for the denying them, I think the ones that I've seen a lot lately is where, you know, they're already not living together. They don't really have a reason to see one another moving forward. And so there's not this like overarching need to have it. So I think a lot of the judges are like, okay, if there wasn't that physical violence and we're saying just everybody stay in your lane, stay away from them and move on with your life kind of scenario, they don't always grant them because they don't see that there's a need for it.
Right. One more question from the public.
Okay. Next question is, what protections can a person expect a PFA to provide?
So it's supposed to make you feel safer. What I describe to my clients is you're not in a bubble. And so if you have somebody that is hell-bent on doing something to you, this isn't really going to help you. So I often counsel clients about safety planning and things that they can do to try to keep themselves safe, because this is in reality just a piece of paper that's telling someone to stay away. And you can go through all the different check boxes on the form, say, you know, you shall not contact this person through third parties, through social media. You know, you're not supposed to see them. If you see them on the street, you're supposed to turn away. It doesn't always happen that way. So there are all these different protections that you can check off. But in reality, everybody has to also do their best to keep themselves safe.
And what it does offer you is help in the event of a violation. Okay. So what that means is that, and also help with someone who's a rule follower. So if your person that's been bothering you is someone who has a lot to lose, you will find they're like, it's not worth risk going to jail or losing money because I have a big corporate job, or I'm in the military and I can't risk this. You will find that if someone is, I think she likes me, I'm sending her a bunch of text messages when there's a PFA and they're like, I can't risk jail, I can't risk the embarrassment. You will find that some people, they need that thing to go, oh, you're serious. You don't want to be with me. You don't want to talk to me. Sometimes that's what it is. The other reason it's helpful is because it lets outsiders see it's serious. So when I have a protection from abuse order against my child because they're 25 and I told them to get in my house and they were abusing me or they were arguing with me or they're fighting, whatever, and they show up and the police go, come on, this mother and daughter, no, I have protection from abuse order. Or, you know, your father and son, no, I have protection from abuse order. You guys were dating and you still have to exchange your kids. Yes, we have to exchange our kids, but we're going to exchange them at this police station and you're going to be there in case something happens because of protection from abuse order. So sometimes it helps because the person is a rule follower, and sometimes it helps because the authorities take you more seriously when you have this. And unfortunately, you know, people don't always, as girls, we've often heard things like, oh, he pulled your hair, he liked you when you were little. The grown-up version of that is, yeah, well, I know he comes around a lot, but he just wants to ask you out on a date. So sometimes that protection from abuse allows these people who dismiss you to say, oh, there's a court has already said this person has crossed the line, so I have to help protect and enforce this order.
Yeah, and here's another scenario that it's helpful. I know a lot of clients that I have, they have a criminal case, and maybe the guy's convicted or he pleads guilty to whatever, and there may be a criminal no contact, but they don't get that in a piece of paper that's given to them, right? So they're still allowed to have the civil protection order. And for them, a lot of times it's just that comfort of having that paper that they can show to somebody physically, like, look, I have protection against this person. Even though the criminal protections are greater and are going to probably end up in, you know, bigger penalties for the defendant, it is just a really helpful tool for them to have and know that they have it and carry it with them.
Well, thank you, ladies, for all of the great information. Thank you, Diamond. I really appreciate both of y'all coming on. And I just want to say to anybody out there that's in an abusive situation, who thinks that they need a PFA or think that they're in a situation that they can't get out of, call the police, go down to your local courthouse, call 911, do whatever you need to do to get the help that you need. Unfortunately, me and Jackie have both lost our siblings to domestic violence. So you can't ever take domestic violence, for a joke. You can't ever think that maybe this will just stop on its own. Domestic violence, unfortunately, always get worse. I've really never seen it get better. I've seen people leave, but I haven't seen where, it's just suddenly out of the blue, just gotten better. So if you are in trouble, get all the help that you need. There's many, many different things that you can do. If any one of you have any other resources that you would like to give out, this will definitely be a good time to do it.
Yeah, so my organization is Delaware County Victim Assistance Center. We help with all crimes. We started out doing just sexual assault, stalking, but we do all crimes now. We help all crime victims, seniors as well, kids, the whole gamut. We also have a domestic violence center in Delaware County. That's the Domestic Abuse Project. They also are in court weekly for protection orders. They're also starting to take some custody cases, which is wonderful. We also have Legal Aid of Southeastern Pennsylvania here in Delaware County. They will help for protection orders. You don't have to have an income amount. They usually do a income check to see where you are, whether or not they can help you, because they help people that are of limited means. But they will help everybody with protection orders as well. And they're also in court every week helping people with PFAs.
Right. If you are accused of violating a protection order, for instance, or involved, you may qualify for the public defender's office for those indirect criminal contempts. Remember, they are not criminal in the sense of a misdemeanor or felony, but they do have sentences that could be including jail time. So contact the public defender's office in Delaware County. Generally speaking, there are some attorneys who take reduced fees. There's a list at the Delaware County Bar Association that you can see as far as reduced fees. However, keep in mind, if you have been charged with either a crime related to your protection from abuse, or you are the defendant in a protection from abuse, you may have to foot the cost yourself for your defense. Mm-hmm. So it is best, if at all possible, to stay away from someone if you are the defendant and there is a current protection from abuse order against you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Our next show topic, we are going to be talking to police officers just to help us navigate some issues that are happening right now just in the community, and some of the assumptions, some of the problems that we have with the police department, some of the feelings that people have. Again, I would like to thank you, Jennifer. I would like to thank you, Jackie, for both coming on to talk about this important topic. And everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
CMPradio.net, it's the station. Listen, man, let's cultivate together. Bring us all your show ideas. Content creators, we're looking for that. Videographers, we're looking for that. You can be